In quest of a solution, it was 5:30 when Holmes finally returned, bright, eager, and in excellent spirits, a mood that often alternated with bouts of deep depression. He took the cup of tea I had poured for him and remarked that there was no great mystery in the matter they were discussing. According to him, the facts seemed to suggest only one explanation. I expressed my surprise at his confidence, asking if he had already solved the case. Holmes clarified that it would be too much to say he had solved it, but mentioned he had discovered a suggestive fact, which was very indicative. He had consulted the back files of the Times and found that Major Sholto, of Upper Norwood and formerly of the 34th Bombay Infantry, had died on April 28, 1882. I admitted my confusion, stating that I failed to see the significance of this information. Holmes, slightly taken aback, encouraged me to consider it from another angle. He pointed out that Captain Morstan had disappeared and that the only person he could have visited was Major Sholto, who claimed not to have heard of Captain Morstan being in London. 4 years later, Sholto passed away, and shortly after his death, Captain Morstan's daughter began receiving valuable gifts, culminating in a letter that described her as a wronged woman. Holmes speculated that the only wrong referred to could be the loss of her father, and questioned why the gifts would start immediately after Sholto's death, unless his heir knew something of the mystery and wanted to make a mention. He asked if I had any alternative theories that could explain the facts. I questioned the nature of the compensation and how oddly it was conveyed. I also wondered why the letter was written now instead of 6 years ago, noting that it spoke of justice, which seemed impossible since her father was likely dead. Holmes acknowledged the difficulties in the case, but expressed confidence that their expedition that night would clarify everything. He pointed out that a four-wheeler had arrived and that Miss Morstan was inside. He suggested we should leave, since it was already past the hour. I grabbed my hat and heavy stick, while Holmes retrieved his revolver from the drawer and tucked it into his pocket, indicating that he anticipated a serious night ahead. Miss Morstan emerged from the cab, wrapped in a dark cloak, her sensitive face composed but pale. Despite the strangeness of the venture they were undertaking, her self-control was admirable as she readily answered the additional questions Holmes posed. She recalled that Major Sholto had been a very close friend of her father's, mentioning that her father's letters often referenced the Major. They had served together in command of troops at the Andaman Islands, which had brought them together frequently. She then brought up a curious paper found in her father's desk, which no one could decipher. Although she didn't think it was important, she thought Holmes might be interested in seeing it, so she had brought it along. Holmes unfolded the paper, smoothing it out on his knee, and examined it meticulously with his double lens. He noted that it was made of native Indian paper, previously pinned to a board. The diagram depicted a part of a large building with various halls and corridors, marked with a small red cross and the faded notation 337 from left. In the corner was a peculiar hieroglyph resembling 4 crosses in a line, accompanied by the rough inscription, the sign of the 4 Jonathan Small, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, Dust Akbar. Holmes admitted he did not see how this related to their investigation, but recognized it as an important document, given the care with which it had been preserved. He urged Miss Morstan to keep it safe, suggesting it might prove useful, and indicated that he was beginning to suspect the matter was deeper and more complex than he initially thought. Leaning back in the cab, I noticed the tension in his brow and the vacant look in his eyes, which signaled his deep contemplation. Miss Morstan and I spoke quietly about our expedition and its potential outcomes, while Holmes remained reserved throughout the journey. The September evening was dreary, and although it was not yet 7 o'clock, the city was shrouded in a dense fog. Mud-colored clouds hung low over the streets, and the lamps along the Strand appeared as misty splotches of light, casting faint glimmers on the slick pavement. The yellow glow from shop windows spilled into the steamy air, creating a murky radiance across the crowded thoroughfare. The endless stream of faces moving in and out of the light, both joyful and sorrowful, gave an eerie, ghost-like quality to the scene. While I didn't typically let impressions affect me, the heavy atmosphere and the unusual business we were engaged in had made me anxious and unsettled, a sentiment I could see reflected in Miss Morstan's demeanor. Holmes, however, remained unfazed, jotting down figures and notes in his open notebook, illuminated by his pocket lantern. As we approached the Lyceum Theatre, we encountered thick crowds at the side entrances. A continuous stream of hansoms and four-wheelers discharged their passengers, men in crisp shirts and women adorned with jewels. We reached the third pillar, our meeting point, when a small, dark, brisk man, dressed as a coachman, approached us. He inquired if we were the ones accompanying Miss Morstan. She confirmed her identity and introduced us as her friends. The man scrutinized us with piercing eyes and, in a somewhat stubborn manner, asked Miss Morstan for her assurance that neither of her companions was a police officer. She promised him that they were not. He whistled sharply, prompting a street urchin to bring over a four-wheeler and open the door. The coachman took his place at the box, and we settled inside. Hardly had we done so before the driver urged his horse into a rapid pace, and we sped away through the foggy streets. The situation felt peculiar as we were traveling to an unknown location for an unknown purpose. It struck me that our invitation could either be a complete ruse, which seemed unlikely, or it indicated that significant matters were at stake. Miss Morstan maintained her resolute and calm demeanor, and I attempted to entertain her with tales from my adventures in Afghanistan. However, my excitement about our situation and curiosity regarding our destination made my stories a bit convoluted. To this day, Miss Morstan insists I recounted a gripping tale about a musket peering into my tent at night, and how I ended up firing a double-barreled gun at it. My initial sense of direction was lost amid the fast pace, the fog, and my limited knowledge of London, leaving me unaware of where we were headed, only recognizing that we seemed to be traveling quite a distance. Sherlock Holmes, however, remained oriented, muttering street names as the cab navigated through squares and winding back streets. He named the streets as we passed: Rochester Row, now Vincent Square. We're heading towards the Surrey side, I believe. Yes, now we're on the bridge. Look, you can catch glimpses of the river. Indeed, we saw a fleeting view of the Thames, its surface reflecting the lamp's glow. But soon the cab plunged into a maze of streets on the other side. Wordsworth Road, Holmes continued. Priory Road, Lark Hall Lane, Stockwell Placey, Robert Street, Cold Harbor Lane. It seems our quest is taking us through some less fashionable areas. We arrived in a rather dubious and uninviting neighborhood, characterized by long rows of dull brick houses, occasionally interrupted by the garish lights of corner pubs. There were two-story villas with tiny gardens, followed by endless stretches of glaring new brick buildings, evidence of the city's relentless expansion into the countryside. Finally, the cab halted at the third house in a new terracing. The surrounding houses were dark, with only a faint light visible in the kitchen window of the one where we stopped. When we knocked, the door swung open immediately, revealing a Hindu servant dressed in a yellow turban, loose white clothing, and a yellow sash. The sight of this oriental figure standing in the mundane doorway of a suburban house felt oddly mismatched. The servant announced that the Sahib was waiting for us, and as he spoke, a high-pitched voice called from within, instructing him to show us straight in it.